The sea was quiet that morning, quieter than anyone could remember. The waves moved slowly, like they were breathing after a long and sleepless night. The color of the horizon was gray, stretching into the mist, fading into the distance until it was impossible to know where the sky ended and the water began. Old ships rested along the harbor, their wooden bodies creaking softly, as if whispering to each other about the days when they still mattered. A thin light came from the east, pale and unsure, touching the surface of the sea like a hesitant hand. Everything moved in slow rhythm. The ropes, the masts, even the wind seemed to think before it blew. It was not a beginning, not yet. It was simply the breath before something unknown. Far beyond the pier, a small ship drifted lazily across the calm water. Its sails hung half open, tired and old, catching the wind only enough to keep moving. No one could tell where it came from, or why it was alone in a morning so still. The harbor men had stopped guessing. They had seen enough ships leave and never return. One old sailor leaned against the dock post, his eyes following the small vessel. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The sea had a way of speaking to those who listened long enough, and this morning it was speaking softly, not in words but in rhythm, in silence, in the patient movement of water against wood. The wind picked up only slightly, just enough to carry the scent of salt and damp rope through the air. A gull cried once, then disappeared into the mist. The sound was faint, swallowed by the sea. A cat sat near the edge of an old ship, its white fur shining dimly in the gray light, watching the ripples move below. The world seemed to hold its breath, caught between night and day, motion and stillness. And somewhere in that stillness, the sea made its first call. Quiet, slow, and endless, reminding everyone who could hear it that the ocean was not a place to conquer, but a voice that never truly sleeps. The next morning the wind returned from the north, slow, gentle, and cold. It wasn't strong enough to move the sea, only to touch it, leaving thin silver lines across the surface. The sails swayed lightly, like breathing lungs, pulling against ropes that had grown stiff from the salt. There was no noise but the occasional creak of wood and the distant whisper of waves breaking against the stones. The air carried a smell of old water, of iron, and of time itself. The sea didn't roar, it murmured. It spoke in the soft language of patience. The sailors listened, not because they had to, but because there was nothing else to hear. The captain stood at the bow, still and thoughtful, his coat brushing softly in the faint breeze. The world around him seemed to move only when he allowed it. The sea obeyed no man, yet it seemed to slow down when he looked upon it. The wind lifted his hair, then dropped it again, like a tired sigh. Far away, a cloud stretched itself thin across the sky, turning the morning gray. There was a strange calm, the kind that lives before storms, or between thoughts. The men worked without words. Their movements were slow, steady, the rhythm of those who understood that time at sea doesn't pass. It drifts. By midday, the wind had changed its tone. It was no longer kind, nor cruel, only alive. It pushed the ship a little faster, then let it rest, as if testing the crew's trust. A gull flew low, almost touching the deck, then vanished into the horizon. The water deepened in color, turning from gray to blue. But not the blue of beauty, the blue of depth, of mystery. The sailors didn't look away. They had seen too much to fear the unknown. The wind circled the mast again, soft but certain, whispering its truth. No man sails the sea sails him. And as the day faded, they felt it, that quiet reminder that the ocean never bends, it only breathes. The sea was calm that morning, almost too calm. The horizon looked like a faded line drawn by a tired hand, and the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of salt and sleep. The ship moved slowly, each creak of its old wood echoing like a quiet heartbeat. The crew said little, their eyes fixed on the still water. Then, someone saw it. A dark shape far away, small and uncertain, yet different from the natural rhythm of the waves. At first they thought it was a cloud, low and drifting. But as the minutes passed, it grew sharper, taller, more defined. A flag, black and slow-moving, cutting through the gray air like a shadow. The captain didn't speak. He watched the distant sail as though it were a memory returning from the depths. The wind barely moved. The sea held its breath. Even the gulls were silent now, circling high above, as if avoiding whatever came from the horizon. The black flag rose higher, its edges torn, but it flew with purpose, calm, steady, and patient. No ship came close without reason, and no pirate showed his mark unless there was meaning behind it. But the meaning didn't matter to the men on board. All that mattered was the silence. It was a silence that weighed more than fear, a silence that knew too much. Hours passed, and the dark ship never approached. It stayed far away, floating on the edge of visibility, like an idea the sea refused to forget. The crew went back to their quiet work, pretending not to notice, though their eyes betrayed them. The horizon remained haunted by that small shadow, motionless and waiting. When night began to fall, the shape slowly faded into the mist, swallowed by the same gray calm that had birthed it. No words were spoken. There was no need. Every man on the ship felt the same thing deep within, that some presences don't need to come closer to change everything. Some are felt only once, yet they stay forever in the tide. Beneath the still morning sky, the ship drifted like a thought too heavy to finish. The sea shimmered faintly, but its light had no warmth. Down below, in the belly of the vessel, old chests rested against damp wood. They were covered in dust and salt, their hinges stiff, their stories older than the men who guarded them. No one spoke of the treasure, though everyone knew it was there. Gold has a strange silence. It glows without sound. It waits without movement. The air around it feels heavier, as if even the wind knows to slow down. Each box was marked with a different past, and yet all of them shared the same truth. Every piece of gold comes with a price already paid. At night, when the world above slept, one sailor would sit beside the largest chest, tracing his fingers along the wood. He would listen, not for the sea, but for something deeper, the faint heartbeat of greed, of memory, of regret. The candle beside him flickered, painting soft shadows across his face. He didn't believe in curses, not really, but he understood that some things carry the weight of all who touched them. The sea kept its secrets, but sometimes it whispered them back in the creaking of wood or the sigh of the ropes. The sailor would smile faintly, as though hearing an old friend, and the silence around him would grow thicker. When dawn returned, light spilled slowly through the cracks in the deck, touching the chests with gentle gold. The crew moved carefully, avoiding the lower hold as if it were sacred or dangerous. Above, the sea stretched endlessly, calm and gray, while below, the treasure waited in patient stillness. No one dared to open the boxes anymore. It wasn't fear, it was respect. They knew that the sea doesn't give anything freely, not even beauty. And as the wind moved softly through the sails, it carried with it the quiet truth of all sailors, that gold may shine, but it never glows without the shadow of blood. Night had fallen when they first saw the lights, faint, flickering, distant, like candles forgotten on the edge of the sea. The ship drifted closer, slow as breath, and the shape of an old harbor began to appear through the mist. The water around it was still, the color of ash and time. Wooden docks leaned toward the sea, their planks soft with rot. No voices called out, no lanterns swayed in greeting. It was a place that had forgotten sound. The wind seemed to pass around it rather than through it, as if the air itself respected its silence. The men stared quietly, uncertain whether they were arriving or returning. The harbor was filled with ships, or what was left of them. Some were half sunken, others tied loosely to their posts as though still waiting for a crew that would never come. The masts swayed gently in the wind, making a faint, hollow song. A single sailor stepped onto the dock, his boots echoing softly. Each sound he made felt heavier than it should, stretching into the fog. The wood beneath him groaned but didn't break. Around him, ropes hung like forgotten memories, and barrels lay split open, empty. The sea whispered against the stones, a voice too old to understand. The man turned once toward the ship, but no one followed. By the time dawn arrived, the fog had thickened until the world seemed carved from smoke. The harbor was fading again, dissolving into the gray morning light. The sailor returned slowly, his eyes distant, his hands trembling with a quiet he couldn't explain. No one asked him what he saw. They already knew. Some places were not meant to be visited, only passed through. As the ship drifted away, the harbor sank back into the mist, taking its secrets with it. The sea swallowed the last reflection of its lights, and all that remained was a feeling, soft, cold, and endless, as though the ghosts of that harbor had chosen to follow them home. Morning came pale and slow, a color between silver and ash. The crew gathered on the open deck without being called, boots damp, hands quiet, eyes set on a horizon that felt like a thought not yet spoken. The captain stood with them, not above them, his coat dark with salt and night. No drum, no speech, no grand sign. Only the soft hush that arrives when men admit they belong to nothing but water and wind. A clear bottle rested on the rail, ordinary as a cup, its glass cool with mist. The sea breathed in long, shallow waves, and the ship answered with a slow creak, as if the wood itself wished to listen. Rope brushed rope. A gull drew one dim circle in the gray, then vanished into the light. What they were about to do did not need blessing. only silence long enough for choice to become truth. The captain unrolled a scrap of paper and did not read it aloud. He let the wind learn its edges, then folded it small and slid it into the glass. A sailor tied a short length of rope around the neck, the knot neat and plain. They were not swearing to glory, nor to plunder, nor to the bright brass words that had rusted in other mouths. They were choosing a quieter claim, to move when the wind moved, to rest when the water asked, to take nothing the sea had not first offered, and to return what could not be carried without cost. Freedom for them was not a shout but a posture, shoulders lowered, eyes open, hands empty enough to receive. The bottle looked simple, almost foolish, and that was its strength. It held a vow the world could not weigh, a vow light enough to float and heavy enough to hold them to themselves. No one said Amen. The captain set the bottle on the rim of the ship, and for a heartbeat it stood perfectly still, as if listening. Then a small tilt of the wave lifted it free. It slipped into the gray, turned once like a quiet star, and drifted under a veil of pale light. The men watched without blinking. Their oath had no judge but the ocean and the low sky that kept it. Yet something changed, gentle as breath. Shoulders loosened, time unknotted. The wind found an easier path through the rigging. Ropes thudded softly against the mast. The sail gave a long, patient sigh. When the bottle became only a dot on the water, the crew returned to their places. Nothing was different, and everything was. The ship moved on, not toward conquest, but toward a wider kind of silence, where freedom meant listening until the sea answered back. By evening, the air had changed. The sea that once rested like glass began to stir, a slow breath turning restless. Clouds gathered in the west, dragging long shadows across the waves. The crew watched quietly as the sky darkened, its color shifting from gray to a deep, bruised blue. The first drops of rain came without warning, tapping against the deck like gentle knocks before a door opens. The sails trembled, unsure, and the ropes began to hum with the coming wind. The captain lifted his gaze to the horizon. His eyes didn't show fear, only recognition. He had seen this before. The moment when the sea decides to remind its passengers who truly commands it. The storm grew slowly, like a story unfolding without haste. The wind howled through the masts, rain thickened, and the ship tilted, rising and falling with the pulse of the ocean. Lightning cracked once, then disappeared, leaving only the echo of its brief existence. The men held fast, their hands gripping ropes that burned with salt and strain. None of them shouted. In the heart of the storm, words had no use. It was a strange kind of unity, one made not by choice, but by survival. Each man moved with the other, not because he was told to, but because the sea demanded it. In that chaos, they were equals. The ocean had stripped away their names, leaving only motion and breath. Hours passed before the rage of the sea began to fade. The rain softened, the wind sighed, and the waves grew tired of their own strength. Dawn crept over the edge of the world, pale and forgiving. The deck was soaked, the sails torn, yet the ship still floated, alive and breathing. The men sat quietly, soaked to the bone, but calm. They didn't speak of courage or fate. Those words were too small for what had happened. The captain walked among them, nodding once, as if to confirm that they had all survived something greater than themselves. The storm had not broken them. It had bound them together. Beneath the silence of the morning, the ocean seemed to hum a new rhythm, one of brotherhood, born from the storm's cruel grace. Night settled with deliberate softness, as if darkness laid a blanket over the water. The ship moved through low fog at the pace of a long breath. Sea answered with careful sounds. No stars showed, only a thin oval of moon behind iron cloud. Lamps were trimmed to a hush. Men worked in pairs, speaking in gestures, not words. Each plank kept a private sigh, a wooden memory rubbing at time. A rope thudded once, then settled like a thought that decides not to be spoken. No one named it dread, yet all knew the feeling that travels with old vessels and older tales. Not fear of enemies or weather, but of the way the sea remembers everything. Near midnight, a pale light gathered under the bow, not bright or sharp, only a milk-blue bloom drifting with the ship. It neither led nor followed, but kept beside them like a patient thought. When the swell rose, the glow leaned. When the swell fell, it settled like breath returning to a resting chest. No rope was lowered, no orders called. It asked nothing but attention, and attention they gave as prayer. Someone whispered, "Sea fire." Another, "Memory made visible." The captain watched, counting the beats between wave and light as if timing a heart. Timbers clicked. A lantern trembled and did not go out. No threat came, and yet no rest was possible. The light kept company the way a story keeps watch. Toward dawn the fog thinned to paper, and the glow unstitched itself until only gray remained. The ocean spoke again. Ripple, hush, the small knock of water on wood. A gull crossed the faint moon and vanished. The cat curled and slept. One sailor traced the rail, finding it warm though the air was cold. Another let sleep take him. No blessing was asked, and none refused. The sea kept its counsel, and the ship kept on. What they called a curse did not wound or break. It simply stayed, like shadow with a moving body. It asked only to be noticed, and they noticed. After that they worked more softly and spoke less, as if the water were a room where someone rests. When the sun rose, it found them already quiet, carrying a silence meant to travel. They found it on a quiet afternoon, when the sun was pale and the sea almost asleep. Inside an old leather case lay a folded map, its corners eaten by salt, its ink nearly gone. No one remembered who brought it aboard or when it first appeared. The captain unrolled it on the deck, and the crew gathered around, their faces half hidden by light. The lines on the paper moved strangely, fading when looked at too long, reappearing in new shapes like the sea itself. There were islands that did not exist, coastlines that changed with each blink. It was not a guide, but a riddle drawn by the ocean. The wind touched its edges, and the paper shivered as if alive. That night, no one slept. The ship moved without command, following currents that didn't exist on any map they knew. The stars above seemed to shift their places, and even the compass trembled. The captain stood by the wheel, his hands steady, his eyes lost in thought. Some of the men whispered that the map wasn't made to be read, but to be obeyed. Wherever it led, they would go, not out of courage, but because turning back felt impossible. The sea had a direction of its own, and they were simply part of it. Beneath the deck, the old chests creaked softly, gold dreaming of new places to hide. When dawn arrived, the captain brought the map to the edge of the ship. The ink had vanished completely, leaving only blank paper the color of mist. He held it to the wind for a moment, then let it fall. The sea took it gently, folding it into its endless rhythm. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. Some truths were not meant to be carried, only released. The horizon stretched like a promise with no end, and the ship drifted forward into it. The ocean was calm again, but in that calmness lived something vast, a feeling that the journey itself was the destination, and that every wave was another line drawn on a map that could never, ever be finished. Morning rose without color, a thin veil of light spilling gently across the motionless sea. The air was cool and hollow, carrying no sound but the soft breathing of waves against the ship's sides. The men moved slowly, their steps quiet, their eyes tired but calm. The storm, the map, the curse, all of it felt far away now, as if it had belonged to another life. The captain stood near the bow, his coat heavy with salt, his gaze lost somewhere between the sky and the reflection below. Around him, the world seemed to have forgotten movement. The sails hung like still hands, and the ropes rested like sleeping veins. The ocean no longer spoke in whispers or in rage. It simply listened. As the day drifted on, the sea became a mirror of dull silver. No wind came, and even the gulls had vanished. One by one, the crew sat down where they stood, not from exhaustion, but from a strange peace that required stillness. The captain closed his eyes, hearing something beneath the silence, a sound faint and endless, the deep heartbeat of water. He realized it had always been there, hidden beneath storms and winds, waiting for them to be quiet enough to hear it. It was not a warning, nor a call, but a farewell. The ship swayed softly, the planks creaked with tenderness, and the air felt thick with the weight of understanding. When the sun began to set, the horizon turned to gold and gray, fading into each other like breath into sleep. The captain placed his hand on the railing and smiled faintly. No words passed his lips. There was nothing left to say. The men watched as the sea swallowed the last of the light, and in that moment, they knew their journey had ended, not in discovery, but in surrender. The ship drifted slowly toward the dusk, becoming smaller, quieter, until it was only a shadow moving through the shimmer of water. And when even that shadow was gone, the ocean sighed once, long and low, keeping their story as it had kept all others, beneath the surface, in the last voice of the sea.